All right. Hello, everyone. Looks like we got sound into OBS. That's up here. All right. Ready there. So, quick introduction for folks that might be new. My name is Tim, and I go by foamyguy on GitHub and Discord, as well as Twitch, although somebody beat me to it on Twitch, and so I'm actually foamyguy_Twitch over there. That's where you can watch this stream if you want, Twitch and YouTube. The links I put in the live broadcast chat, which is the chat that's showing below me, that's on Discord, the Adafruit Discord, in the live broadcast chat channel or Zoom, whatever Discord calls these things. So that's where you can hang out if you want to ask questions or comment on anything that I'm working on. We will be working on CircuitPython related stuff. If you are new to the stream and you don't know what CircuitPython is, you can learn more at circuitpython.org, this website right here. This is basically a version of Python that runs on tiny computers called microcontrollers. If you click downloads here, you can see a bunch of examples of them in all these different photos. And one thing you'll notice is that there are all sorts of different shapes and sizes of these things. Some have more pins, some have fewer pins, some have screens built in and alligator clips, some have screens and touch interaction, like you can touch on this tree thing over here. I think you can also touch the crows or something like that as touch points. So real tiny, USB ones, all sorts of different shapes and sizes of these things. Specifically today, I'll be looking at ones with displays. In particular, I happen to have this, which I didn't load up my camera before, but I have this PyPortal Titano, which is horrendously out of focus. Let's see if we can fix that real fast. And I also don't have it turned on yet. So we'll get into that in a little bit, but this is an example of one of these types of microcontrollers here, as well as my TV remote. This one has a nice big touchscreen on it, and I tend to like to work on the screen stuff, so that's kind of what I'm playing with today. And so this is the device that I'm using for it, which happens to be really nice because it has this big built-in screen. There's also a touch overlay on it. So you can do touch interaction like buttons and stuff like that. So at a high level, that's what we're doing. We're writing Python code that runs on these devices and allows them to interact with other hardware peripherals. In my case, I'll be interacting with the screen and the touchscreen. But on some of these, they just have standard sort of I/O pins. You can connect up other sensors and, LED lights, beepers, buzzers, motors, pretty much any kind of little electronical gadget widget thing that you can imagine. There's probably going to be a way that you could connect it to these microcontrollers and interact with it. I just noticed that my water to the kitchen to get ice for it before I started, and I failed to bring it back. So I'll probably have to get up for a quick moment and grab my water here shortly. I still have a little bit of coffee, though, so I'll finish that off first. Also, programming note, I will probably be cutting it off relatively early today. I tend to stream for around 2 to 3 hours, just depending on what I'm working on and how I'm feeling and stuff like that. I don't really have a set schedule. I just kind of go until I feel like getting up and moving around some. But today I have some folks coming to do some work on the house at noon my time, which is about 2 hours from right now. So I'll probably be cutting it off a little bit before that. I may be back later on tonight or tomorrow. I'm not sure. Also, programming note on the 30th, April the 30th, which is not next Saturday, but the Saturday following that. So 2 weeks away from today, I will not be streaming on that day. I have other stuff going on, so no stream on the 30th. But I will be here next week, I believe, on the 23rd, and I'll be back on the 7th. And there will be a deep dive. So Friday night on the 29th, I'll do deep dive, but on the 30th, I won't be doing the stream. So that, I think, is the intro. Hello to Tammy as well in the Twitch chat, and let me pull this one up on top as well. Discord, how's it going, C. Grover? So I can see both of these here. There we go. So today I'm getting into something I started last week. I don't remember, was that on this stream or was it on the deep dive stream last week? I don't actually remember for sure. But one of the things I worked on last week was this PR for TileGrid to be able to change the bitmap on it. Yeah. So basically TileGrid, for folks that are brand new, I'll give you the kind of quick 50,000 foot version. TileGrid is one of the kind of core components of Display.io. Display.io is the newer way to draw on screens with CircuitPython. There were previous libraries that allowed you to draw on screens, but they were relatively simple compared to Display.io. Display.io is very object-oriented and is built a lot like smartphone display or something like that, whereas the previous ones were a little more primitive. It was kind of like, draw a pixel here, draw a pixel there, maybe put some text in a very specific font on the screen, whereas Display.io is a lot more versatile. Everything is object-oriented. You can load up different fonts. You can do things other than just individual pixels. You can create widgets, which is kind of the primary sort of goal that I have in mind for the work that I'm doing today is creating widgets, which are like objects that draw stuff on the display, But there is an object called TileGrid. Basically what this does is it breaks a bitmap down into tiles and then allows you to specify which tile you would like at any given location within a grid. So you can take particular tiles out of a source bitmap and then put them in whatever location within a new grid that you want. And so what I was working on last week was making it so that you could change the bitmap. Ordinarily, or I should say like as of right now in the released versions of CircuitPython, when you set up a tile grid, you specify a bitmap when you initialize it, and there's not currently a way to change it. So that's what I was trying to do, is add a way to change it. And we did get that working, which was nice. I was pleasantly surprised with being able to get that working. And I put in a PR for it, and I got some feedback from Jeff and Dan. So I'm trying to work on that feedback, which is right now, basically what I am going to be doing is refactoring it a bit to try to make it use this function. So I kind of had some... Well, folks can see the PR if you're interested in following kind of the whole conversation. It's 6270 on the CircuitPython repo. Oh, what have I done here? Undo that. Okay. Better. Yeah. No, I must have just typoed that accidentally. Let's get the CircuitPython repo open. Was I in this one? I ended up starting a new one, actually, didn't I? Started a new one. For some reason we were having trouble with this one when I went to make the PR. This is the one I want, actually. So I was having trouble. It was kind of telling me there were some changes that didn't seem like they were actually part of my my PR that I meant to change. And I couldn't figure out why they were getting intermixed within. So what I did is I just cloned a new copy of CircuitPython repository and started from there. That got it taken care of. So grid bitmap property, that's the branch I use. I'm pretty sure. Yep, sure is. Okay. So basically, I did not quite have all of the checking in place, type checking, or maybe we had type checking, but we were missing the size checking. There are, in the initializer, which I could actually just pull up here. Let's see, is this shared bindings or bindings? I need two of these right now. Inside shared bindings in the init function, which I think it's called make new, is that right? Yeah, make new, TileGrid make new, Display.io TileGrid make new. There are these checks right here, which basically verify that the specified bitmap is equally divisible by the specified tile size. When you create the tile grid, you give it a height and a width for the tile size, but there is a restriction that the bitmap must be equally divisible by that tile size. So, if your tile size is like 10 by 10, then your bitmap must be multiples of 10, 50 by 50 or 60 by 60 or whatever. As long as it's multiples of the tile size, then it will work. But if it's not, then it will raise this exception. So this was one of the things that I did not do initially when I created the set bitmap portion of this code. Set bitmap right here. Originally, we did not have these size checks. You can see I actually went back and put them in here, and I've now commented them back out because what I've started doing was refactoring this into its own function, enforce bitmap size, which I don't know. Let's see, is that declared in this file? Yeah. So I created this function at the suggestion, I think, of Jeff. Yeah. I think so. Factoring this block out from the constructor and shared bindings. So this was a good idea because like otherwise we would end up basically repeating a bunch of the same code that's in the initializer already, which it's not the end of the world, but it takes up extra space, and then it means that there's 2 copies of that code in different parts of the object. So like if the logic needs to change in the future, if somebody finds a bug in it or wants to enhance it further, then like there's 2 places where that change needs to get made. Whereas if we refactor this into its own function, then we can just call that function from both places. Then if we ever find a bug or want to add new features or whatever, there's only one spot to do the change. So that all seemed pretty good to me, and I did refactor it into its own function. The thing that I am working on now, though, to get us up to date to where we are about to start is that I have utilized the new function from inside the bitmap setter right here, but I have not currently utilized the new function from inside of the initializer, the make new. So what we need to do is call this new function from inside of here instead of using the if statements like this. But it is a little bit more involved than that because a portion of this code also basically figures out a couple of the sizes. The bitmap height, the bitmap width, I did those out of order, width and height. The native object, do we need that one? I'm not sure if we need that one for sure or not. Bitmap width and bitmap height, and then tile width and tile height. And we need to get these in the constructor because they are used. So like in the current constructor code here, it does basically the same thing. I copied a lot of this enforce size out of the constructor. It creates these 2 variables, width and height. It's checking here for the type of bitmap. There's actually a couple of different types of things it could be. It could be a standard bitmap in memory. It could be a on-disk bitmap, which is a special type of object that is still a bitmap, but not loaded. The entire thing is not loaded into memory. Just goes straight from the disk to the screen. And then it could also actually be a display IO shape, which is a lesser used type of display IO object, but is one that is possible to put on TileGrid. So this is checking the type. Once it figures out the type, it's then setting these variables width and height. Although I do notice the code to actually set them is the same in all 3 of these cases. Maybe it would be worthwhile to do this outside of the if statements or something, because these 2 lines are basically repeated inside of each branch of this if. Maybe we could do those outside or something. There might be room for other efficiency improvements. It's also creating tile width and tile height. And then it's doing the enforcement of the size like I was talking about before. And then when it calls TileGrid construct, it is giving it native, which was the object that it created here. Well, I mean, it didn't create it exactly. It was passed into us, and then we turned it into this MP object T native. We put it in this variable native. Basically, depending on which type it was, it does it a little bit differently. This one is for the shape type. It's kind of part of the shape type enforcement here is saying, like, if we did not successfully turn it into a shape, then it goes on and checks if it's a bitmap, and then it goes on and checks if it's an on-disk bitmap. But the gist of it is we need to get all of these things. We need to have this variable native. We need to have bitmap width, bitmap height, tile height. We need all of these as well, although they are not really part of the equation here. These are all kind of separate from the part we're working on. So, you know, my first inclination is like in the constructor, just comment out all of this, right? Because this is all inside of our enforce thing now. Whoa, I want to erase it. So, you know, we could call enforce like this. We need to pass it self in and bitmap. Bitmap, which would actually, I think, be... No, I guess there is bitmap right here, okay. And this would do the enforcement for us, but now the problem is we don't have these variables anymore. We're creating them inside the function, but we don't have them out here where we need them in order to pass to TileGrid construct. So we need a way to get those values out of this function. And it's tricky for a couple of reasons. Probably the biggest one being that I don't really know C that well, so I'm kind of fumbling around through the code. But it's also, we have like we have basically 5 values we need to get. We need to get tile width, tile height, bitmap width, and bitmap height, and then we need to get native. We need to get all of those values. Native, I guess, I'm almost inclined to keep native outside, even if it means repeating a little bit of the code, because native is kind of the odd value out here. Native is a MP object T, whereas bitmap width, bitmap height, tile grid, tile height, all those are just ints. Uint 16, bitmap width and height. Uint 16, tile width, tile height. So those are all ints, whereas native is this different object thing. So in Python code, you know, my inclination would be like this function could just return values. It could return all 4 of those, or it could even return all 5 of those in Python code. We could return all 5 of those objects, no problem. It doesn't really matter that they're different types. As long as the code that calls it expects the correct types, then it will just work. And that's one of the beauties of Python. C is not so much. We can't return multiple objects from the function, so we need to have a different scheme for getting those values out of there. And I think the scheme that I lean towards is maybe making an array that is holding 4 unsigned ints, passing the array in as another argument inside the function. If the array is not null, then fill it in with these 4 values. If it is null, then just ignore it and don't use it for anything. And the reason for that is basically because inside the bitmap setter down here, we don't need to get those values out. We're not using them for anything here. So we don't actually need to like find them. You know, the only thing that they were being used for in here is the actual size enforcement. And since the size enforcement takes place inside of here now, you know, we don't need them in this scope. Therefore, we don't need to come up with any scheme to get them into here, but we do in the constructor up here. So I think that's what I'm going to go for is make an array, pass the array in, check if it's null or whatever the C equivalent of null is, void maybe, I don't know. If it's not null, then fill it in with those 4 values. And then after we call this, we'll basically take each of those 4 values and put them back into our bitmap height, tile width, bitmap width. We'll put them back into those variables, and then they can go on to get used in the constructor here. And so the first thing is, again, I don't really know C. So what is the syntax for making an array of ints in C? Make array C code. I know Java, and there's some carryover, like the syntax tends to be the same in some cases. It's pretty similar, actually. Yeah, it looks pretty similar to Java. So we're going to go type, we're going to go name, we're going to go square brackets, and then in our case, our size is 4. So type is uint16. That's what all of these 4 things were. uint16. I'll say sizes 4. And then we're going to pass sizes into here. And then when we get back out of here, we're going to go basically create each of these again. Now, realistically, I guess we could change the code down here to just access them out of the array. And I'll do that if somebody suggests it in the PR, but by default, I kind of want to keep as much of the code the same as I can. So if I can avoid touching this part, then I would like to do that. And the way that I can avoid touching that part is basically just by creating these again. Bitmap, height, and I'll have to settle on an order, I guess. And I don't think it really matters, but it seems as good as anything else to just go bitmap width and then height first. So size is 0, size is 1. Not super familiar with Python's internals, but are you going to need to pass in a pointer to the array rather than the actual array? Very good question, and I do not know the answer. So that is part of definitely a gap in my knowledge, is like functional usage of pointers, basically. I have an idea of what pointers are, but I do not have really nailed down when you need to use a pointer instead of the array itself. So very possible, but I do not know. I think it's really more of a question of C directly than it is Python internals, I think. But either way, I do not know the answer. So we shall find out. Yeah, so if it works how I assume, then this is pretty much what I want. There's definitely a decent chance it doesn't work how I assume. So we'll figure that out when we try and call it. One thing is here we would have, I guess this would be uint16 the array sizes. And then here we would basically set them inside this function. So sizes 0 is bitmap width. Just going to duplicate this a couple of times. Height. This one was tile width. Tile width. And tile height. And we'll need to fix the indexes, of course. Okay. So this feels too easy to work. I will admit that. But possibly try. Oh, yeah, we called it. We updated the constructor, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Has not crashed yet, which is a good sign. Maybe you'll actually want to create a struct and pass that around, but I'm not my most solid ground coding wise here, so I could be wrong. I think a struct is one option. So kind of I'll give you my train of thought here while we're waiting on this to build. My train of thought was like, so I started it out earlier. If this was Python, I would just return multiple values and then good to go, don't have to worry about it. But C doesn't allow that. And so the first thing I did was like C return multiple values from function or something like this. And I went and found this page. And basically it's like, hey, you can't return multiple values, directly just like you could in Python, but here's the, the workarounds, the ways to do it anyway. And the options were pointers, structures, and arrays. And of the 3, arrays seemed like the easiest to me. Possibly, again, because I don't really have my head wrapped all the way around the usage of pointers. The concept of a pointer I'm familiar with, right? It's an integer that points to where it's at in the memory, but the usage of it, I'm a little bit still hazy on. like when and where it gets used and the exact syntax and why you use one over the other. That kind of stuff I don't quite have nailed down just yet in my head. Struct, or a structure, was the second one, which, as I understand it, this is basically like making an object, or making a class, really, is what it would be like in Python or Java. At least this is my understanding of it. Bearing in mind, like, I could be wrong here, but this is my understanding. This is like making a class that says, I'm going to have a class. The fields on my class are going to be bitmap width, bitmap height, tile width, tile height. And then you could go and set them. You would like initialize one of those objects, set those values, and then you could return the object. And then in the code outside the function, you could access those values off of that object. Which is nice because each of those values has a name. And giving things names is nice because it makes the code self-documenting, right? When we want the bitmap width, we're calling it the bitmap width. Which I do grant is definitely nice, whereas like in my solution here with the, it looks like I didn't build, but in my solution here with the array, when we want to get bitmap width, we just have to know that it's at the 0 index. You know, bitmap height, we just have to know it's at the 1 index. We could create variables, I guess, for the numbers, and then it would be sort of self-documenting, but not quite as much as the struct. And so struct does seem nice. But array seemed easier to me. Arrays I have worked with a lot more than structs, and so that was the direction that I headed. Let's take a look here. We did pass here. Okay, so, or we did crash on the build. Let's see. Oh, did I not declare pixel shader? Yeah, I would use a struct if you do it like that. Okay, we'll switch it over to that. Sizes. Sizes undeclared. Is this inside the function or outside the function? Oh, okay, I did this wrong. I see. It's much faster this. Oh, no semicolons? Yeah. Every time. Look, some of the code up here as well. Yeah, all the way up here is all missing them too. Too much Python. Yeah, didn't put semicolons on like any of that stuff. So I may try a struct. I'm going to see if I can get this one working because I'm curious. Honestly, I'm curious to try a couple of different ones because like all of this is learning for me. So if I could try out a couple and kind of just get my hands dirty a little bit on more than one, then I view that as a win, even though I'll end up changing it perhaps to the best one. Implicit declaration. Oh, okay. So I think this is telling us we can't call this function before we declare it, which basically means we need to declare it above make new. That's my guess. So when I first wrote this, I just kind of tucked it in down there below make new, but I think it probably wants it to be before since we're going to call it inside there. Some languages have, what do they call that? Function hoisting? Hoisting, where you can declare a function after its usage, but the system knows to internally switch it, basically. Okay, so we kind of have a chicken and egg problem here, where now we moved this up, but inside here it has this function native TileGrid. I am curious though, native TileGrid, this would have been used in here or no? Guess not. Interesting. Why did I end up using native TileGrid? So we are using self. I mean, the simple solution is, again, just pull this up above, but I'm not sure that's the correct solution. Self in undeclared. So I guess the thing is, though, self doesn't exist yet, right? Yeah, self is not getting created until here. Oh, but where did this come from? New object. I guess this is just creating an empty object. That's getting trickier because I don't have self yet. Self in, if I understand the error correctly, it's basically that inside the construct, so enforce bitmap size is expecting to get self in, which it then turns into the tile grid of self, the self object called tile grid. Well, the tile grid object called self, rather. But in the constructor, I have called enforce bitmap size and I passed it self in, but I don't have a self in. In the other usage of this enforce, which is down in the bitmap setter, down here in the bitmap setter, we have self in because it was passed to us, because that's just how properties are. But it seems like in the constructor we don't. It's not passed to us the same way. Maybe the function, maybe enforce bitmap size should not take self and bitmap. Maybe it should instead just take the actual primitives. Tile height, tile width, bitmap height. It's a bunch more arguments. But then we're not passing objects around. Numbers. In the constructor, it's just self, it's created. But it's created after, I think. And I mean, it's created here, it looks like to me. And then I guess, like, ultimately really filled in here, kind of. I mean, I don't really read C too well, so my understanding of this is kind of creating a blank object of the tile grid type, setting its type, and then my understanding would be this call here is basically instantiating it, filling it in as a tile grid, setting all of the actual tile grid fields on it, so that they have values that aren't just null, which is, I assume, what they would be here. And so we could do it after this, but the way the constructor was before is all this checking of size was done before this. So I assume the idea is like we want to check the size before we create it. Created where you want, but you do want to test the input before creating it. So yes, it should pass the parameters. Okay. I think we'll do that. So let's say instead of self-in and bitmap, I think this will mean a little bit more of the code ends up getting repeated, but in the end, it will mean that we don't have this problem anymore. And I'm not going to call this sizes. Instead, I'm going to call it... Actually, maybe we don't need this. Yeah, actually, that solves this problem too, because we will figure these out before we call this function, and then we'll already know them. So we don't need to get them out of here. Nice. Also, I think we get to move this back down, because we no longer need to do this. No longer need to make native. Need to do any of this. Oh, but this is also checking type. We need the bitmap at least. Or else we need to take the type check out of here. But the type, it's kind of two things that I was trying to refactor into the function to avoid repeating, which is the type check, make sure that the bitmap, the argument that you're setting to bitmap is actually one of the 3 valid types. And then also to check that the size fits within that restriction of the multiples need to, bitmap needs to be a multiple of the tile size. So it is actually doing double duty, kind of. So we do, I think, need bitmap. But I don't think we need self, which does get us around the whole self-in problem. And actually, I guess if we're going to get the bitmap, then we don't really need to get the bitmap sizes. So why don't we bring in... I don't want to undo all this. Why don't we bring in the bitmap and then the tile grid sizes? What was the bitmap, though? It was the MP object T? Yeah. Object T bitmap. So let's pass in the bitmap and then the tile width and height. And that should still give us everything we need. And then I guess... we either still need to... we will either still need to somehow get bitmap height and width out of the object or out of the function, or we will need to just get them separately in the constructor, which I think actually get them separately in the constructor is probably okay. Let's try it without the like struct or array or anything. Let's try it. We can do it without that first. So where did we use self? We don't want to use self anymore. Instead, we just want to say that it is... Actually, we could just use tile width. I think we don't even need to declare this. We already have tile width in the argument. There's our check. We're no longer going to do this. Okay. This a try. So now here we would call this. We would not do self in. We would do bitmap, and we would do tile width, tile height. Oh wait. Oh, right. Are you are modifying tile width only if it is not set? Or if it's set to 0. Because if it's 0, then it defaults to the bitmap size. If you put tile height and width as 0, then your tile covers the entire... You have one tile in your whole grid, and it's the exact size of the bitmap. So I guess we may still need to get that back out of there, huh? You want to pass it in as a pointer then. How do I do that? Just add a star here? And I don't really know the syntax or how or why. I guess this page is kind of talking about pointers in the first one. Okay, star on the type. So then we can set it in here by going star variable equals. Do we need to use a star to access it too, like this? No. Oh, well, maybe. Doesn't tell us. Oh, it is. Double check. That's the address. It is a little bit different than what this page shows on text. This one has the star after the type, and then the name. Whereas you've got the star before the name. Maybe I'll go back to the array. I mean, the challenge with this is just like I have 0. It's part of a mental block, I guess. I need to just do it and then learn it, and then I'll have a better idea of it for next time. But like I have 0 idea how the syntax for this works. So actually, we don't need to change them. Maybe we don't need to change them. Yeah, let's try to see if we can get away without changing them, and then we don't need to worry about this, right? So if we just don't do these in here, because the thing is, Does this need to change? Need to change when we set the bitmap, or only when we're in the constructor? Actually, the first time I did this, I did not bother changing these in here, the tile width and the tile height. It would be if we figure out how to do it inside of here with pointers or whatever. I guess it does need to technically, because if you pass it a different size, if you're using 0 and 0 for tile width and height, therefore they get set to the bitmap size, and then you change to a bitmap with a different size, tile size is going to be stuck on the old bitmap size. You would then need to, like, either it needs to change in here, or the user code would have to go and change the tile width and tile height. White space doesn't matter. Well, it's not a difference in only the white space, though. It's a difference in the stars here, right? Like, this has type, int, star, and then name. But yours has got type with no star and then a star on the name. This one is different. Are both of these valid and they do different things? This one's more like yours. Yeah, this one matches yours. Type with no star, and then star at the beginning of the name. Difference in white space. Oh, I see what you mean. White space doesn't matter. Wow, that is weird. Ooh, I don't like that. Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying, though. But you can't leave the space out, can you? Can you leave the space out? I mean, and this doesn't matter. This is my own curiosity. But if the white space doesn't matter, can it be like this? No space? Really, that doesn't work, does it? Maybe it does. That is weird. Okay. That'll take a bit to get my head wrapped all the way around, because that I don't think I've ever run into something like that before, where you could change the syntax on either side of a space, have both work. It's kind of a bizarre thing to me. I think it would work, it's just uglier. Interesting. Okay, so then we access it with the star as well, and then we pass it with the ampersand like you showed. Okay. So we can access it, we just use the star also. So let's say we pass them in as pointers. Put all of our stuff in here. Let's go ahead and do this. Whoop. Access them with the star at the beginning. Yeah. And we set them also with the star at the beginning. And then when we call it, so one question I will have is, how do we pass a pointer to a thing that's on another object? So here, we can basically get this. I shouldn't cut it though, let me copy it. We get this, we get this. These get them out of the arguments for us. Out this for now, I think. And then we pass them here with ampersands. Don't need this anymore. But down here, we're no longer doing self. Instead, we're doing bitmap, and we're doing tile width and tile height, but these are on self. So do we do like ampersand in front of self? Bitmap, height. Got our 3 arguments. Get our tile width and height out of arguments. Do we already have bitmap? No. Oh, maybe. Where does bitmap? Map is here. Okay. You do already have bitmap. Okay. All right, so let's try this. This build. Let's see. That won't work either, though. Unless you assign them back afterwards. They'll have to do, because they have to be converted back to Python ints. Referencing board pointer. Bitmap hasn't been set yet? Or bitmap is not a type yet? This needs to... I mean, this is setting native as bitmap. Is this somehow changing bitmap? Bitmap is object here. This is doing this cast to native base. Seems like all of these put bitmap into native. I would not expect it to be changing bitmap, but it like it must be, because when we did take those out, it looks like this. I'm assuming this means it thinks bitmap is void, null, or whatever. Basically, that it's not a bitmap. I don't know. Might be out of my depth here. Native and bitmap are pointers. Any change to native is a change to bitmap, except that when doing it with native, it knows about its structure because it's the right type. Okay. Well, let's see. We basically then, we try passing bitmap as a pointer to. And we could do these after. So if I understand correctly, this caused bitmap to get thin, whatever this stuff is doing. It still thinks it's void here. We also don't have native. And I guess we could try like native equals bitmap, but since bitmap is not actually getting filled in inside of here, that's not going to help us. Native gets here. We don't even actually have native. We actually need to make make it so if the rest of that was working how I was thinking, then native would be getting filled in, but the rest of that not actually way. Wait, what? Maybe this is just cascading? But I mean, this is not the first use, because X is set here. Oh. Every time. Start at the top errors, I guess. You would pass native instead of bitmap. Save. This problem too, where we have one int and one uint 16. I'm feeling so good about this attempt. I think I want to go back to how it was when I started. Like I'm getting further away. Which thing? Oh, I see. I see. That's an int because it's a pointer. Oh. Thank you, by the way. You were incredibly helpful here. I would definitely still be flattering about your help. I definitely do still have... Like, I guess we're probably also not setting up pixel shader yet. Maybe we're pretty close, I guess. Maybe we keep going. If we can get bitmap get filled in inside the function. I understand what you want to do, and I'm not pointing you in the wrong direction. Oh, I hope you hope you understand what I want to do. I mean, at a high level, really all I want to do is try to not have this block of code twice. Because we need to do the same check when we are creating the object, and then also when we're creating the tile grid. And this check does the type, check to make sure the bitmap is one of the valid types, and then also check to make sure the size fits within the constraints of multiples of the tile size. And so we need to do that when we create the tile grid. We also need to do that when we change the bitmap. And so like lowest hanging fruit is just copy paste this chunk of code, put it one inside the constructor where it came from, put one inside of the setter, which is where I'm ultimately working on right now. I mean, that's the part that I'm adding is the setter. But then we're just copy pasting the chunk of code. And so ideally it would be refactored into a function so that the function can get called from the constructor and called from the setter. And it will do all of its checking for types and sizes. And in the case of the constructor, it will also essentially generate these values for us, the bitmap height and width, tile height and width, bitmap object, it's starting to seem like now we're doing as well that way. Or I guess really what we have is at this point we're having it generate the tile width and the tile height for us. Not generate, but like make available to us. I don't know, maybe those ones are already set here, truthfully. But they could change inside, which I guess is what we need to do, is because they could go in as 0 and then we need them to come out as the correct bitmap size. So inside of here, we need to be able to change them. That's kind of high level, is we want to like not have to copy paste the chunk of code. Although I am starting to think that copy pasting the chunk of code sounds better at this point, fortunately, even though I know it's not the right answer. It is the answer that I am capable of. I do want to push the bounds of what I am capable of, but I'm not sure that I really understand enough of this to actually make it work. So I guess another option maybe is, well, no, because these need to be declared in the right order, I guess, right? I can't call set bitmap from inside the constructor because the constructor is declared first. And we saw before we have to put the functions before we use. I'm going to say maybe we could put it into the enforce function, call the enforce function from the setter, which was working initially when I started today. That part of it worked. And then inside the constructor, maybe we could call set bitmap, which in turn calls enforce. But the problem still remains. We have to get these values back out of there so that the constructor can actually use them. Um, so 80 is right here. If I understand correctly, this is basically telling me that bitmap is void, which means bitmap did not get filled in inside of this thing. But I don't really understand why, because when we had this code in the constructor, it did cause bitmap to get filled in. And there's probably a more correct term than filled in, but I don't know. I mean, conceptually filled in, I'm sure there's a better way to describe it, but it seems like it's void after this function, whereas when all of this code was directly inside the constructor, it was able to access it like this. Although, was it really? Because it actually is doing these things. Not bitmap, but BMP. I think I want to go back to how I started today. is statically typed. Tells you that it is of type void star, which will never change. That bitmap is of type void star? Star means any pointer to anything. Bitmap, whatever, never means anything. I guess I'm starting to think part of my problem here is that this is doing this stuff, this making BMP, and then using BMP width and BMP height, whereas here I am still trying to do bitmap width and height. I guess I need to be getting the BMP thing. Cast to make the compiler see it as something else. It doesn't change the variable, it changes how the pointer is seen. And these are all different also. So we can't just like, about to go down the road, maybe we just can return BMP from this function, but we can't because we need to declare the return type, and this could be any of the 3 types. We can't like say it will return any of those. But I guess probably we could have it return the pointer and then change it back to the object, but I don't really know how. Yeah. I think see, I think I am inclined to go back to how I was, because that's the only way I know for sure that I can actually make it work. Which basically is it really doesn't matter one way or another if I keep this as its own function or not. I guess I probably will because I think it makes the code cleaner, more descriptive, although I guess it maybe should say bitmap type and size, or type size maybe. Use that from the bitmap setter here, but then in the constructor just leave the code in the constructor, and basically then we have more or less this exact chunk of code duplicated, but I just don't know enough to be able to not do it that way. So if somebody on the PR can point me more specifically to how that can be done, I'd be happy to take another try at it, but I honestly don't think that I'm going to get it just fumbling around. Yeah. Roll back. Good news. Back to where we were. And here it's working. Everything functionally works. It's just not as efficient as it could be because basically all the code from here-ish here is basically repeated inside here. Oh, also the self, I guess. Where I got the self from here, but part is in the function as well. And this does work, it just has all of this stuff duplicated. But I don't know how to get it out of there. I don't know how to get the values out. Need them to come out from the yeah. I love Python so much. The ability to just like, this gets so easy in Python because it's just like return, you know, bitmap, whatever, native, bitmap, what BMP, whichever one it actually is, just, you know, return that one, return this one, return this one, return this one, return this one. And then just catch all of those when you call it. Bingo, bango, you're done. Such is not the life in C, though. All right, so let's go back to this. Let's, oh wait, what did I change though? What have I changed? Real? No. Build this. I'll double check that it works. I did test it before and I believe it was working. I'll double check. Like the YouTube, are you still watching is fast on the uptake today. How's it going, Shah 2048? Morning to you as well. One thing I guess that I didn't do before is this stuff inside the setter. I think technically we need. Because in here we basically need to change. Ooh, that gets super tough actually. How do we do that? We can't really do that. Because they're not 0 anymore. Ooh, it might just be on user code. User code might just have to do that itself. Right? Because here it's like, if tile height and tile width are 0, then set them to something else. But because it's set them to something else, you no longer have a way of knowing. I guess if tile height and tile width are the same size as the old bitmap, then we will want to change them to bitmap. Okay, actually, I think I'm coming around to just not having the function. Because if we don't do the function, then we'll be inflating self and bitmap and everything we need, be able to check if the tile height and tile width are equal to the old bitmap size. Then if they are, that's where we want to set them new bitmap size. It's possible for tile width to be 0 when you called a constructor. No, yeah. So it's not possible for it to be 0 outside of init, to the best of my knowledge. My understanding is it can be 0 for a short period of time inside of init. And I believe 0 is probably the default value. And so basically, if you don't pass it, then it will be set to 0. But, you know, halfway through the init, if it was 0, then it gets changed to the bitmap size. But because it gets changed to the bitmap size, it will no longer be 0 when we're setting the new bitmap. So we have to check for the old bitmap size. So here we're no longer going against 0. We actually want to go against the old bitmap size. Then we set it to the new bitmap size. Setting a bitmap, all you need to do is check at the size. Well, but we also need to check, well, I don't know, I guess. I don't know if we need to do it, but it feels like it would be correct to check if the tile size was equal to the old bitmap size and then change it to the new bitmap size, because if the tile size was equal to the old bitmap size and we don't change it, it will, to the user, it will seem like it's placing the wrong tiles, basically. It won't cover the whole bitmap anymore. Like if the old bitmap was 32 by 32 and the new bitmap is 48 by 48, it would still be treating the tile size and width as 32 by 32. And so you would only get 32 pixels out of your 48 pixel new bitmap. I guess we should maybe do these after we raise the error, because like if we are going to raise an error, there's no sense in doing this stuff before. Or is there? There is. Yeah, no, there is, because we might not raise the error if we change the value to a correct one. Yeah. Yeah, I guess actually with my example of 32, 32, and 48, 48, it's not that it would give them unexpected sizes. It would actually end up raising this because it would no longer be modulus equal to 0. 32 doesn't divide into 48. If you did like 32 by 32 and 64 by 64 though, for instance, then you would end up with, you only get like a quarter of the bitmap that you're expecting. Well, I don't know whether you're expecting it or not, but of what somebody might expect. What I would probably expect if I didn't know the internals better. See if we still build. Set a 32, and then, yep, then the tile is 32, yep. And then you set, yeah, that's another good example as well, yeah. So then you set 64 by 32. TileGrid is half the, yep, exactly right. Yep. Is this CircuitPython Mad Flash 19? Yes, it is. I am currently, right now, I'm inside the CircuitPython core, trying to modify TileGrid, which is one of the core components for display I/O, which is the way we draw on displays with CircuitPython. And also, welcome to the chat. Both you and Shaw2048 looks like first-time chatters, so thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions, I don't know your level of experience with CircuitPython. If you have questions, I'm happy to try and explain more. Okay, so one thing is we can just get rid of the enforce function altogether. But it looks like we also have another problem, which is that I've redeclared self or something. Oh, self is already set. Again. Just know it exists. If you're interested, I can tell you a little bit more. There's a very brief high-level look at the beginning of this stream if you want to catch the VOD, but also I can tell you more about it. It's basically just Python code. Well, I mean, here we're working with C code because we're working with the core of CircuitPython. So the actual core project is written with C code, but the using CircuitPython is actually just writing Python code that runs on microcontrollers instead of computers. We have Python code like this, and it runs on a device like we don't have the camera right now. Oh, there it is. Live though. Restart the app or something. Anyway. Oh, is it live now? Nope, not live. Got a cached copy. Anyway, you can see the device here. This is the one I'm working with. And it makes sense because it has a big old display built in. Stuff I'm working on is all display related stuff. Thanks for the follow, Mad Flash. Appreciate it. What did we do here? Okay, so one thing is something to do with this, which we're not calling it anymore. So honestly, we could just get rid of it. Whatever is wrong with it, we don't care too much because we're not using it. Now, what is wrong with the other thing though is, oh yeah, in fact, actually our error was specifically we defined it and not used it. Guess we're gonna have this problem. Yeah. Where I tried to compare to the old bitmap. So I guess the problem is that we can't just grab the height and width of the old bitmap like this. I guess kind of makes sense because like here, it's BMP thing, but this is also not getting it off of self. This is getting the one that was passed in as an argument to the setter. Get the old height and width. Slovak, is this Android Studio? It's not. It is PyCharm, but PyCharm is made by JetBrains, which JetBrains, is that right? Is that the right name? I'm guessing myself. Yeah, Brains. PyCharm is made by JetBrains, and Android Studio is also made by JetBrains. The Android Studio and PyCharm are very, very similar. Yeah. And it's not, I mean, it's meant for Python code, and I'm using it for C code right now, which is not really what it's meant for. But I tried CLion for the month free trial, and it didn't really do anything that PyCharm doesn't that much. There was a couple small things, but there was nothing like earth-shattering that it did that PyCharm doesn't, and so like I just use PyCharm. I use PyCharm for a lot of things. I use PyCharm for web projects as well, even when there's no Python, like HTML, JavaScript, CSS projects. I'll use PyCharm for those as well because it has support for them. Even though there's an actual web one as well, PyCharm works and it's the one I own. So how can we get the old app with height? You basically need to do this whole same thing, but to, I guess, self.bitmap. I mentioned before that I really love Python. I really love Python. I love not caring what type of thing is and being able to just access stuff from it. There's here we have like tons of boilerplate to take our pointer or plain object or whatever kind of thing it is. I still don't quite have my head wrapped around it, but whatever kind of thing it is, we have to like manipulate it before we can really get the stuff out of it. I'm very spoiled by PyCharm. Not by Python, by Python. Not caring about what the type is at all, just like access it, and if it has that, you'll get it. If it doesn't, you'll get an error. But it gets weird too, because like we're gonna need this whole if statement as well, right? Because the old bitmap could be any of these same types as well, and there's no guarantee that the new bitmap is the same one of the types as the old bitmap. Don't need the else, because we do know that the old one will definitely be one of those three types, because it has already been checked. Don't need to do these. How can we go? Brains IDE. Yeah, I really like it. Lots of folks like VS Code as well. I don't have as much experience with that one. But I do really like PyCharm. And I do like the rest of the JetBrains IDEs that I have used. I've used IntelliJ a little bit, and I used CLion for like that month free trial. I liked them both. I just haven't gotten back into Java yet. Eventually, when I do, I'll probably buy IntelliJ. And CLion, I just didn't see enough like features that actually were relevant to me. What in Python corresponds to the .h file? Yeah, I'm probably not the best to be able to answer. I can answer what stubs are. Stubs are just like, it's kind of like an interface definition. Stubs are like defining what arguments a function will take and what fields a class or an object will have, but not, it's only just declaring like what kind of stuff it will have. It's not declaring any of the actual functionality. Just like what arguments it takes, what type they are, what it returns, what type the return is. Basically like the interface in Java land. Do we actually need old native? I don't know that we actually need that. Maybe. Keep it for now. This is gonna I probably don't have too many more tries in me also. Actually, I'm wrapping up here pretty quick. Variable. So this declares BMP with a star, and then it accesses a thing from it here without a star. I declare old BMP with a star. And then I try to access a thing from it with, no. I declare, did I say that right? I don't know if I said that right. I declare it with a star. Then I access something from it without a star. This is exactly how BMP works here. But this one thinks that old bitmap doesn't exist, and it thinks that star old bitmap is unused. Hmm. Oh. What's different about that? Oh, I think I get it. Inside the scope. This variable is gone after we get outside of here. Which is also why this is repeated a bunch of times, actually. So earlier I was like, maybe we don't need to repeat this because it's the same in all three branches. We do need to repeat it because we can only access BMP inside that context. Okay. Well, that's a bummer. So that means we would basically have to duplicate this also. Right, this would have to be here. That's maybe the one thing that CLion does that PyCharm doesn't with this type of code is auto format. I can press Control-Alt-L with Python code and also with web code, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and it'll format it for me with the indentions, but C code it doesn't. CLion does, though. It's kind of a nice feature, but I'm not sure it's worth the cost of CLion for just that. If there was more stuff, like I was really excited for it to have control-click. I use control-click a lot to like click into a function, but that doesn't work with the CircuitPython project, at least. I don't know if it's like this doesn't work at all in CLion, or if it's just the way our project is, it doesn't understand like shared bindings and shared module and all that stuff, or what, but it didn't work, and therefore I get much use out of it. Right, and now these are undeclared. The other thing I would have to do, if we do get this working, I think this has added more code, and it's likely that I will have to disable some modules or things. Because at first, when I submitted this PR initially, it was too big for some builds. And I had went back and disabled display IO for those builds, but Dan mentioned it'd be better to keep display IO and instead disable one wire. So I did go back and disable one wire and then re-enable display IO. And also it was later clarified this is not actually disabling one wire altogether. It's only just disabling the new place where one wire is going to come from. You actually still have access to it through something else. And I think that the newer code pushes it back over the edge. Had at least one fail, possibly more now that I've added a bit more code as well. Did get a build though. It's definitely a good sign. Yeah, that's that like function hoisting Python. It can be declared out of order, but they still know about each other and can call each other. They call it hoisting in JavaScript, at least. I don't know. Assume that it has the same name in all languages, but maybe not. Go just code in here. Oh, it is live now. Okay. We just had to give it some time. Okay, so that is working. Doesn't come through very well on the camera, but it's changing from white with blue outline to gray with yellow outline. So that part's working. So the next thing is we need to make sure if we change it to a different, we try to change it to a thing with a different size, then we don't want it to work. Well, it's not entirely true. If we, yeah, anyway, we need to test the new code basically. If the size of the new thing doesn't divide out correctly, we're using 1 and 2. Our 48 by 48 and 48 by 48. We have 0, which is 47. We could just try 0, and then it should raise an exception. This 47 is not gonna divide the same. Yeah. Okay. So I will say it would be nice if you could, I mean, at that point though, you might as well create a second tile grid, honestly. I was gonna say it would be nice if you could change the bitmap and the tile size at the same time. That way you could change it to a different bitmap and change the tile size, and as long as the new tile size is compatible with the new bitmap, it could work. The way it's coded right now, that can't happen though. Your new bitmap, even if you intend to change the tile size afterwards, your new bitmap needs to be a compatible size with your old tile size. Thing I also want to do is test the case where it's the whole size of the bitmap. But also I'm going to be heading out in like just a few minutes. Probably some or so. Thank you to everybody for watching. Keep working here, but I will be heading out very shortly. Smaller should be okay. Well, smaller, it's not a matter of smaller or bigger, it's a matter of divisible by tile size. Smaller is okay if it is still divisible by the tile size, and bigger is okay if it is still divisible by the tile size. But if not, that's when you have the problem. I'll index out of bounds. Right. Okay. So it only failed when we went to change it. And it does work like this. So this is our one tile test, our single tile size. Basically just showing a full bitmap essentially. And that does work. And so that means that tile size ends up being 48 by 48. Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Oh, my Doggard C++ sheet. Yeah, I need to get one. So we could basically change it to anything that is a multiple of 48 by 48. So really what I want, I guess, in order to test this is we need a, let's do a double that, right? 80, 96. Let's make a 96 real fast. Sure. And so this should allow, I should probably, I guess, have more different stuff, shouldn't I? Okay. Otherwise, we're not going to really, if it's getting it or only doing part of it or whatever. Wrong one. Oh, interesting. So this makes it one way, though. You can change to the bigger one, but you can't change back to the smaller one. Truthfully, my like primary thing I want to support is changing to the same size, honestly. This is kind of like an extra case, really. I don't care that much if it doesn't work right, truthfully, as long as it doesn't do something like or broken, like it does actually. Looks like it didn't change the tile size. Yes, because it didn't, not showing the full image. Thank you. It's bigger though. It does look like double the size, so should be able to go back. Why does it not go back? I don't actually know. I guess I did change it to 96. But it basically only showing the top quarter. It's not bigger. It's the same size. Honestly, maybe we just add an extra restriction that says you have to change it to a bitmap that is the exact same size and just leave it at that. Because that gets rid of this issue altogether. And frankly, like, that's the use case I want anyway. My intention is to change between, like, this image and this image, for instance, and they're both the exact same size. Honestly, I don't really want the thing changing size. It might be interesting if we could support it, but at the same time, I'm also not sad to lose it, because my actual use case is this, which is they're both the same size. Yeah. I think we'll do that, but not right now. Right now I'm going to head out. So basically, though, what we will do is when we go to set the bitmap, we can get rid of a bunch of this new stuff that we added, and instead we don't need to check the tile size anymore. We just check the new bitmap size against the old bitmap size. If they don't match, we raise an error. If they do match, then we know that everything else will already be set correctly and work. Yeah, I think that's what I want. Okay, so we got a plan. We got some learning done. We figured out ways not to do it. That's always part of the battle, figuring out ways not to do stuff. I know what I'll do next. And yeah, after I do that, we'll see if Jeff or anybody on the PR is able to point us more specifically at increasing the code reuse, basically making it more efficient to not repeat that big chunk. Although actually, I guess we'll be no longer repeating as much of it because we no longer need to check the tile size, actually. So we will be checking the type, but we won't really be checking the size anymore. So not as much of the code will get repeated. It'll actually be kind of nice. Maybe the opportunity for reuse is smaller. Anyway, that's the plan. Thank you to everybody for watching. Changing size is problematic if you're running close to memory limits. That's a good point too, yeah. Definitely true. Yeah, I suspect it would fail when you tried to load the second bitmap, but also I don't know, because it does support on-disk bitmap, which I actually didn't realize until I tried it last week. But it does support on-disk bitmap as well, which I don't know how that would end up working. Yeah, thanks, folks. Thank you. Huge thank you to Neradoc. We didn't end up going with what I started with, but I understand it better than I did, which I count as a win, even though I didn't use it, and I absolutely would not have gotten as far as I did without your help. So thank you. Thank you a lot for all of the help. Edison, who said, I haven't failed, I've just found 100 ways not to do it. Yeah, I like it. That's a good mindset. It's important. I mean, like, this is the way I learn. You know, I've never learned about, I mean, I've tried to learn about pointers and C and stuff like this, but I can't just read about it. I have to do it and fail and figure out how it works and how it doesn't work. Like, this is just the way my brain learns. So going through that, it hopefully wasn't too painful to watch, but that's kind of the stuff I got to do. And I feel like I have a better understanding now. Like, the syntax I get now a little bit better. The stars being able to go before or after some of that stuff I'm understanding better, the ampersands and stuff. So like, if I keep getting in there and keep doing it, I think I'll pick it up. But yeah, I'll be back definitely on Friday, next Friday for deep dive. Next week I'll be here at the same time as I was today, which is 10 a.m. Central Time, about 2 hours ago. Whatever time zone you're in, about 2 hours ago is when I started on Saturday, and I'll be back next week. But the following week I'll be off. The 30th, there will be no stream on Saturday. There will be deep dive on the 29th, but no Saturday stream on the 30th. So I'll see everybody on Friday at the latest, but possibly I'll jump back in later today or tomorrow. I'll probably get back into this either later today or tomorrow, so maybe I'll pop the stream on. See you all later. Thanks to all the new folks on Twitch as well. MadFlash19, thank you as well again for the follow.